In October 2019, the moment the 4-year-old child saw the fireplace his family was about to light, he started screaming. "No! Put out the fire! I am scared! They burned me with that fire!" he shouted. When his mother heard these words, she didn't know what to do. A 4-year-old child couldn't form such sentences. Interpreted as a normal childhood fear, this incident took on a different dimension when it reappeared days later. Rebecca woke up in the middle of the night and started talking in the dark. "I wasn't a witch. I just knew about medicinal herbs. Tituba lied to me." Dorothy and her husband Thomas couldn't understand where their daughter had learned these words. Tituba was the name of the slave woman who testified at the Salem witch trials and started the whole disaster. How did a 4-year-old child know this name? And why was she speaking as if defending herself? You are about to pursue a voice from the most well-documented mass hysteria in history. This voice belongs to a woman who has been silenced for 3 centuries. The Hartwell family lived an ordinary life in the quiet town of Danvers, Massachusetts. In the fall of 2019, they had decided to restore their home. The wooden house, dating back to the 1780s, was a source of pride with its historical character. Little Rebecca was a cheerful and curious 4-year-old girl. She had never watched a horror movie on television. Dorothy was careful not to watch even historical documentaries in front of her child. Rebecca's world was colorful and safe. But that October evening, everything changed. Thomas was preparing to light the fireplace in the living room. The weather had turned cold. They wanted to spend a warm evening together as a family. As he struck a match, Rebecca came running from the kitchen. Her face was pale. "No, Daddy! Don't light the fire!" she screamed. Her voice was sharp and filled with fear. Dorothy came running from the kitchen. Rebecca was trembling. Her eyes were fixed on the flames in the fireplace. "They burned me with that fire." Thomas picked up his daughter. He tried to calm her. "Baby, it is just a fireplace. Nobody burned you. You are safe." But Rebecca cried and repeated, "Fire! Fire! They're burning me." That night, Dorothy spent hours trying to calm her daughter. Rebecca finally fell asleep, but she was sweating as if she had had a nightmare. The next morning it seemed forgotten. Rebecca laughed at breakfast. Dorothy and Thomas decided it was a childhood fear. Maybe a friend at daycare had said something about fire. Maybe she had seen a picture in a book. They were looking for logical explanations. But 3 days later, in the middle of the night, Dorothy woke up to a sound. There were noises coming from Rebecca's room. Simone was speaking in a low voice. Dorothy walked down the hallway to her daughter's room. When she opened the door, the sight she saw broke her heart. Rebecca was sitting up in bed. Her eyes were open. Her gaze was vacant. She was talking. But it wasn't the voice of a 4-year-old child. She was speaking in a more mature, older voice. "I wasn't a witch. God is my witness. I wasn't a witch. I only knew about healing herbs. My grandmother taught me, yellow root, mint, and black clover, these are not sins." Dorothy held her breath. Rebecca's eyes were still staring into space. Tituba lied. "That slave, that devil woman lied." She pointed at me. She said I danced with the devil too. But I never danced, I only healed babies. But Pastor Paris was angry because his prayers weren't working. My herbs worked. Dorothy trembled as she went to her daughter's side. "Rebecca, my baby, who are you?" she whispered. Rebecca turned and her eyes locked with her mother's. "My name is Patience," she said. Rebecca's eyes closed and she fell asleep again. Dorothy couldn't remember the rest. She had woken Thomas in the hallway, and they had waited by their daughter's bedside until morning. The next day, Rebecca was her usual self. She didn't remember that night. Dorothy asked about the name Patience. "Who is that?" she said in an innocent voice. But Dorothy couldn't forget it. Tituba. Where did she know that name from? That night, Thomas sat down at his computer. He began researching the Salem witch trials. Tituba was a slave of Reverend Samuel Parris in Salem Village, now Danvers, in 1692. She was the first domino in the witchcraft accusations. 2 young girls, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, had begun to exhibit strange behavior. Tituba accused them of witchcraft. Tituba confessed under interrogation. She named others. Then, a wave of witch hunts began in the town. 20 people were executed, 19 were hanged, and 1 was crushed to death. Hundreds were imprisoned. Thomas was looking for the name Patience, but he couldn't find anyone by that name in the official Salem court records. Most of the victims were listed, their names written down: Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Goode, John Proctor. But there was no woman named Patience. Perhaps she had never been brought to trial, perhaps she had been erased from the records, or perhaps there was a darker truth that Thomas couldn't shake. Maybe that woman had died without being recorded. Dorothy decided to consult a child psychologist, but before taking her daughter, the same thing happened again one night. Rebecca was sitting at the table when she suddenly got up. She walked towards the basement door. Grandma hid it behind the wall. She put the diary behind the wall, so no one would find it. If someone had found that diary, they would have burned her too. Thomas and Dorothy looked at each other. The basement was the place they planned to renovate. Rebecca had never been there, because her parents had forbidden her to go there, saying it was damp and dark. "Which wall, baby?" Thomas asked. Rebecca's eyes were still staring into space. "The east wall behind the stones. There is a small gap. A book bound in brown leather. The names of the herbs are written in that book, and the date is 1689. 3 years before the Salem trials. Thomas felt his knees tremble. Dorothy contacted Dr. Lawrence Whitmore from Tufts University the next morning. Whitmore was a professor specializing in New England history. He had published dozens of articles on the Salem witch trials. He also consulted in the field of child psychology. He tested claims of past life memories using scientific methods. When Dorothy described her daughter's situation over the phone, she sensed the skepticism in Whitmore's voice. "Mrs. Hartwell, dozens of families come to me every year with similar stories. Children recount things they've heard on television, in books, or even in conversations at daycare, as if they were their own experiences. Salem is a particularly popular theme because it is part of the school curriculum." Dorothy protested. "Professor, my daughter is only 4 years old. She doesn't go to school yet. The details she is describing are horrific. She knows about Tituba. She mentions a diary. She gives the date 1689. Whitmore was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath. "All right, let me test your daughter. But let me tell you this. I've been doing this for 30 years. Not a single case has scientifically proven past life memories. Every time, a logical explanation was found." The appointment was set for Thursday of that week. Thomas and Dorothy took Rebecca to Whitmore's office in Boston. The professor was a serious man in his 60s with gray hair. The eyes behind his glasses belonged to a scientist who examined everything. He smiled when he saw Rebecca. This smile seemed artificial to Dorothy. Whitmore sat Rebecca down in a comfortable chair. He gave her toys. Then the test began. First, he showed Rebecca various photographs from the Salem period. He showed old prints, engravings, and historic buildings. Rebecca didn't recognize most of them. But when she saw one, her eyes widened. It was a drawing of Reverend Samuel Parris's house. Tituba worked in this house, and Betty was always sick. The little girl was always shivering. Whitmore took notes, but his perspective on the matter did not change. "Rebecca, how do you know this house?" "I don't know. I just know it." Whitmore showed another picture. He showed a picture of the inside of the Salem meeting house. The trials were held here. There were wooden benches. The judges sat up high. Everyone was screaming, "Witch." The professor stopped taking notes. This detail was too specific for a 4-year-old to know, but he still had his doubts. Then Whitmore started asking trap questions. "Rebecca, how did they punish witches in Salem?" Rebecca looked up and answered, "They hanged them on Gallows Hill, but some died in prison, from the cold, from disease." Whitmore tensed. It was the right answer, but popular culture had the perception of burning witches. "The child didn't say burn," she said hang. Whitmore continued in a harsher tone. "Did they burn witches alive?" Rebecca shook her head. "Number they burned them in Europe, but in Salem they only hanged them, and they crushed one person with stones, Giles Corey, because he wouldn't talk. He wouldn't admit his guilt." Dorothy held her breath. Giles Corey. In 1692, an old man who refused to admit the charges. The court piled stones on his chest to make him confess. The man was crushed to death. It was one of the most tragic details of Salem's history, and Rebecca had said that name. Whitmore took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. "Miss Hartwell, your daughter is very smart, but this information could still have come from a source. Maybe a documentary. Maybe a teacher at daycare told her. Dorothy leaned forward. Professor, you are talking about a documentary my daughter has never seen. You are talking about a nursery school trip she never went on. Please test her. Ask her something no source could tell her, Whitmore thought. Then he turned to Rebecca. Rebecca, if you really lived during that time, tell me this. What was Tituba's husband's name? It was a very specific detail. It was rarely mentioned even in history books. Rebecca closed her eyes. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she answered. His name was John Indian. He was also a slave. But he confessed. He lied to save his life. Silence fell over the room. Whitmore dropped his pen. She had given the correct answer. Tituba's husband really was a slave named John Indian. He had also confessed during the witchcraft trials to save his life. But it was strange that a child would know this information. This could no longer be a coincidence. Whitmore stood up. He began pacing the room. Okay, let's say there really is something, an anomaly. Let's say this child somehow carries knowledge of that period. Then we need physical evidence. You mentioned the diary Rebecca spoke of. If it really exists, it needs to be found. Thomas nodded. She mentioned the east wall of our basement. We were going to open it during the restoration anyway. Whitmore cut him off, but you are afraid. Because if you don't find anything there, it will just be a fantasy. And if you do find something, Dorothy finished the sentence, then it means my daughter has someone else's memories inside her. Whitmore made the final decision. I'll come with you. Let's open this wall together. If there really is a diary, it will be one of the most important discoveries in history, a name erased from the Salem trials. A victim not recorded in the archives, and if there isn't, at least we'll provide psychological closure for your daughter. That evening, Professor Whitmore returned to Danvers with the Hartwell family. No one spoke during the journey. Thomas's hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. Dorothy held Rebecca's hand in the back seat. Rebecca looked out the window. There was wisdom in her eyes. By the time they reached Danvers, it was dark. The old house looked eerie in the shadows. Thomas turned on the basement lights. The damp smell was still there. The stone walls bore the weight of centuries. And the east wall was there, covered with cracked, weathered bricks. Rebecca stopped on the stairs. She didn't come down. She just pointed. Look behind the middle stones. There is a small gap. My grandmother did it. Because they were coming. Pastor Parris's men were coming. They were searching houses. They were looking for evidence of witchcraft. But my grandmother hid the diary because that diary told the truth. Whitmore, Dorothy, and Thomas went down to the basement. The professor had a small camera in his hand. I'll record everything, he said. Thomas took a pickaxe and a hammer. He approached the bricks in the middle of the east wall, and he began to strike. The first brick fell. Behind the wall, a dark void appeared. Thomas held his flashlight and looked inside. There was something there, a small rectangular package, wrapped in oilcloth. It had been waiting there for 330 years. Thomas's hands were shaking. When he pulled the oilcloth-wrapped package out of the void, he felt its weight. It was small but dense. Whitmore turned the camera on him. Open it slowly. If this really is something from the 17th century, exposure to air could damage it. Dorothy was holding Rebecca's hand at the top of the stairs. Her daughter wasn't looking at the basement. Her eyes were closed. Her lips were moving. It was as if she was praying, or perhaps saying goodbye. Thomas placed the package on the old wooden table in the middle of the basement. Whitmore approached together. They unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a small book bound in brown leather. The leather had cracked and faded with time, but it was still sturdy. There was no writing on the cover. Thomas looked at Whitmore before opening the book. The professor's face was incredibly tense. Open it, he said. The first page opened, and there, written in faint ink in Old English letters, was a name, Patience Goode. The year of our Lord, 1689. Patience Goode. The name Rebecca had said at midnight. The date was 1689, 3 years before the Salem trials. Whitmore put his hand to his mouth. My God, this is a real diary. Thomas turned the page. On the second page, there were lines written in neat handwriting. This book was left to me by my grandmother, Margaret Goode. She knew the healing herbs. The women of the village would come to her. When their babies were sick, when their husbands were injured, my grandmother would heal them. Yellow root, mint, black clover, pine bark, gifts from God. But the pastor hated her because prayer didn't work, herbs did. When my grandmother died, she gave me this knowledge. Keep it, she said. Don't show it to anyone, because they will say it is the work of the devil. Dorothy was crying silently on the stairs. Rebecca, her eyes still closed, continued to whisper, "My grandmother was right. I shouldn't show it to anyone." Whitmore turned to the next page. Here were drawings of various plants, rough but detailed drawings. Next to each plant, its English and Latin names were written. Golden seal, for fevers, feverfew for headaches, black cohosh for women's pains. And at the bottom, a small note read, "These are not witchcraft. These are God's gifts, but they will not believe me." As a historian, Whitmore understood the value of these pages. In the 17th century, women's medical knowledge was equated with witchcraft, especially in New England, among the Puritans. A woman's ability to heal was either a miracle from God or a deception from the devil. Most of the time, the second option was accepted. Thomas turned the pages toward the middle of the journal. A more excited, more scattered handwriting began. Date: February 1692. The month the Salem trials began. Betty Paris and Abigail Williams fell ill. Tituba was telling them strange things, talking about dreams and visions. The girls were screaming and shaking. Pastor Paris called me. "Help," he said. So I gave them mint tea. I gave them calming herbs, and Betty started to get better. But then Tituba ruined everything. Tituba was questioned. She confessed. She said she had spoken with the devil. She said there were other witches, and she pointed at me. "Patience Goode," she said. "She is a witch, too. She also uses herbs for magic," she lied. God is my witness. I never spoke with the devil. I only knew what my grandmother taught me, but no one listened to me. The next page was written much more hastily. The ink was smudged. It was as if the writer was in a hurry. Date: March 1692. They arrested me. They chained me. They shouted in the middle of the village, in front of everyone. I cried. "I am not a witch," I shouted, but no one heard me. Pastor Paris cursed me from the pulpit. "Servant of the devil," he said, and they threw me in the dungeon. It was dark, cold, and filthy, and there were other women there. Sarah Goode, Sarah Osborne, Rebecca Nurse. They were all innocent. Whitmore began to cry. This was a first-hand account of one of the darkest events in history. But most importantly, the name Patience Goode did not appear in the official Salem court records. She was a woman erased from the pages of history. Perhaps she had died before she could be brought to trial. Perhaps the records had been deliberately destroyed. Thomas reached the last page. Date: April 1692. I am sick. The dungeon is cold and damp. The coughing has started. Ironic, isn't it? I, the woman who healed others, am now dying, and no one is healing me. Sarah Goode is also sick. I heard her coughing last night, and I know we will die here. We won't even go to trial. We won't even be recorded. We'll just be forgotten. Date: May 1692. The handwriting was very weak, barely legible. I don't have the strength left to write about this day, but I want you to know this. Whoever you are, whoever finds this book, I was not a witch. I only tried to heal. I healed with what my grandmother taught me. I healed with the plants God gave us. But they turned me into a monster. And now I am dying. Please remember me. My name is Patience Goode. And I was innocent. At the bottom of the last page of the diary, there was one more tiny note. If you find this, tell my story. I was not a witch. I was just a healer. Whitmore closed the book. His hands were shaking. He had been doing this job for 30 years. He had examined hundreds of cases. He had found logical explanations for all of them, coincidences, leaks of information, figments of the imagination. But this was different. A 4-year-old child had mentioned a name not found in historical records. She had described the location of a diary, and that diary was exactly where she said it would be. Whitmore buried his head in his hands. I've denied this for 30 years, and now I don't know what to say. Dorothy picked up Rebecca. She went down to the basement. Her daughter looked at the diary, but she didn't touch it. She just whispered, "Now people will know. They'll know Patience's story." She wasn't a witch. She was just trying to help. Rebecca looked genuinely peaceful for the first time in weeks. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thomas turned to Whitmore. "Professor, what happens now?" Whitmore raised his head. His eyes still looked shocked. There was a new determination in him. "Now, we will make this diary known to the world. It will be dated with carbon tests. The handwriting will be analyzed. History books will be rewritten, because Patience Goode was one of Salem's lost victims. Your daughter Rebecca gave Patience one last chance. She wanted to tell her story." Dorothy stroked Rebecca's hair. "But how? How is that possible? How can a child carry the memories of a woman from 300 years ago?" Whitmore replied. "I don't know. Science can't answer that yet, but maybe some stories are just that powerful, meant to be told. Perhaps some voices are too right to be silenced, and perhaps Patience found Rebecca because her story needed to be heard." That night, in the basement, 4 people sat around the old diary: a professor, a mother, a father, and a child. And all of them paid silent tribute to a woman forgotten 3 centuries ago. Patience Goode's diary underwent the most comprehensive scientific examination in history. Harvard University laboratories analyzed the leather and ink. Carbon-negative 14 tests confirmed the diary was written between 1680 and 1695. Handwriting experts identified all the characteristics of 17th-century New England writing style. No modern intervention, no trace of forgery was found. The diary was authentic. And most importantly, botanical historians confirmed that the medicinal plants listed in the book matched the medical practices of the time. Patience Goode had truly lived, and she was truly one of the unnamed victims of the Salem witch trials. Whitmore presented his findings at an academic conference. Among the audience were historians, psychologists, even quantum physicists. Everyone asked the same question: how could Rebecca Hartwell have known this information? Whitmore gave an honest answer: "I don't know. It is something science can't yet explain. But the undeniable fact is this child named someone who isn't in the historical records." She described the location of that person's diary. That diary was found exactly where she said it would be. I was skeptical for 30 years, but not anymore, because the evidence is right in front of my eyes. The conference hall fell silent. Then an elderly historian stood up and began to applaud. Then the entire room stood up, because this wasn't just a paranormal event. This was a moment of justice for a woman forgotten by history. Rebecca Hartwell never spoke of Patience again after that day. She no longer woke up in the middle of the night. Her fear of fire was gone. It was as if she had completed her task and now found peace. Dorothy and Thomas were relieved to see their daughter return to normal. But Rebecca had changed. She was more mature, more empathetic. When she turned 5, she said to her mother one day, "Mom, sometimes people are misunderstood. They're just trying to help. But others punish them because they are afraid. It is sad." Dorothy realized at that moment that her daughter was not just a child, but somehow possessed a deeper wisdom. Perhaps Patience's voice had not completely disappeared. Perhaps it just continued to live quietly within Rebecca. The town of Danvers embraced Patience Goode's story. A new name was added to the Salem Witch Trials monument: Patience Goode, 1692, healer, not witch. Rebecca was there with her family at the opening ceremony. She was 8 years old now. She stood in front of the monument and whispered quietly, "People know you now, Patience. You are no longer forgotten." Dorothy squeezed her daughter's shoulder, and in that moment she felt something very strange. It was as if the wind had changed, as if an invisible presence in the air had taken one last breath. Then it left peacefully. Perhaps Patience had truly gone to rest, because her story had finally been told. Years passed. Rebecca had a normal childhood. She went to school, made friends, graduated from high school. But inside, that experience was always there. At 16, she was asked in an interview, "Do you still remember those days? Do you remember Patience?" Rebecca smiled. "I don't remember her, but I feel it, like a dream, distant but real. And I know she really existed because the diary is there, the monument is there, and I was a tool to tell her story." The interviewer asked, "So do you believe?" Do you believe in reincarnation? Rebecca thought. I don't know. Or maybe some souls can't rest until they find justice. Maybe Patience was just waiting for someone to hear her. And I was that person. Today, Patience Goode's diary is on display at the Peabody Essex Museum. Thousands of people come to see it every year, and every visitor asks the same question. Is this real? Did a child really find this? The museum guides tell the story, and the visitors listen in amazement, because this is not just a historical artifact. It is proof of a voice that even death could not silence. It is proof that oppression cannot win, that the truth will eventually come out, and it is perhaps a sign that memory is carried not only in the mind, but also in the soul. In the streets of Salem, tourists still visit the witch trials, but now they know one more name. Patience Goode, the woman not in the records, the healer who died silently, and they remember the message that came with a child's voice from the 17th century to the 21st. I was not a witch. I was only trying to heal. Perhaps the greatest magic was love, healing, helping others. And perhaps that is why Patience returned, because that kindness, that mercy, was immortal. And no court, no dungeon, no time could ever erase it. Rebecca Hartwell is 26 years old today. She was studying medicine. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Because healing is in her soul. Maybe it was an inheritance from Patience. Maybe it was just her own choice. But every time she looks at a patient, she remembers this. Healing is never cursed. Healing is the most sacred act. And if history has taught us anything, it is this. Fear can silence the truth, but love keeps it alive forever. Do you believe Rebecca truly carries Patience's memories? Or do you think it is just a coincidence? Subscribe to join us as we uncover the next mystery, because some stories are stronger than death, and some voices deserve to be heard, even centuries later.